So I am going to now turn it over to Erin and Kevin, and we'll look forward to your questions as we go forward.
Myrna, as always, thank you so much for that amazing detail and important information from Washington. It really helps us put into context the work that we do at the local level and helps us know what to expect as we go forward. Kevin is going to come on with me, I think, in just a moment. And while we are not siblings, we didn't dress in the same color like Phyllis and Julie. We have been spending lots and lots of time together, and it looks like, Kevin, I am now seeing a different part of your screen than I was before, which means the presentation go back up. Awesome. Your tulips are beautiful, though.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. To get us started, I'd like to just bring us to the next slide, which will look familiar to many of you. We wanted to spend some time reminding you of the ways to think about extended school year services given COVID-19 and the school closures. So first, a reminder that between now and the end of school, it's important that you're analyzing data to consider which students are and are not eligible for extended school year services. Again, as a reminder, every state is different as it relates to extended school year, so it's hard for us to say anything other than go ahead and use your state guidelines related to making those decisions. Many of those constructs are about regression analysis, and so thinking about regression for students when they are away in the summer is the appropriate process to go through if that's what your state guidelines call for. And some of you, many of you, I know this applies to me, we had made many decisions about extended school year services for students prior to the events of COVID-19 and school closure. So those decisions continue to be available to us to consider. We want you, though, also to think about any changes that have happened for students related to their IEP progress between school closure and the end of the year. Kevin's going to talk a little bit about benchmarking progress as it relates to that in a bit. And it's important that you remember that the data that you had prior to departure and as it compares to the data at the end of the year helps you better understand the impact of COVID-19. We really, and the school closures on students with disabilities, that we believe that information will be very important to all of us as we think about the larger impacts of COVID-19 for students with disabilities. But that is not necessarily required for purposes of ESY decisions. We want to make that clear that those are two different pieces of the puzzle, but they're both important, and you really want to make sure you have that information. And then this summer, it's important that in some way you implement your extended school year services that you've determined are necessary under FAPE for students under their IEPs. And so we're encouraging you to go ahead and implement those services. We'll talk a little bit about the logistics of that next, and continue to think about this issue of COVID-19 impact. We did want to also share with you that we've heard of several districts and even some states that are thinking about how to support the impact of COVID-19 using some of the CARES funds or other funds that might be available for all students. And COVID-19 and school closure has impacted everyone, certainly. And so thinking about that and how that will be resolved is really important. Julie and Phyllis mentioned the importance of your collaboration with your general education colleagues and your curriculum directors, your superintendents, your principals, as well as special educators and classroom teachers collaborating and thinking about how are we going to address the impact of COVID-19 for all students, and making sure that centered in that are the needs of students with disabilities and what they need if you're addressing impact for all students. And then over the summer, we also encourage you to plan for the return in the fall and to really assess students, and that may or may not change FAPE for students upon return. So those are all important constructs, and I'm going to offer an opportunity Dave or Kevin for any other comments you'd like to make on this slide, and then continuing on into the next slide around logistics for ESY.
Right. So really 3 areas of data collection that or 3 things that people need to be thinking about here, and they don't necessarily coincide with this slide, but 3 things that people need to be thinking about here are ESY is sort of one data collection bucket, and that would really be in the green area over there on the left side of the screen, and that's the typical data collection that everybody is doing, and really what does that look like, and all of those other sorts of things. Another sort of bit of data collection that everybody should be doing is looking at our favorite dance is the COVID slide, like the electric slide, but the COVID slide. So the COVID slide, and so that would be probably the blue area in the middle. And really, what does that look like? And then the last area of things that you need to be considering here are, and it doesn't really necessarily coincide with the red, but it is in that time frame of the red that you're going to be thinking about it. It's actually further off than that is just the compensatory, if there are going to be claims for compensatory, and what does that look like. So I'm going to move on and help you think through a little bit of the ESY logistics, because I can tell you that oftentimes people ask me, hey, Kevin, how do you have all of this time to do all this work? And I say, well, actually, it falls right in line with the regular work that I do in my own school district. So as I have been thinking about things in my own school district and then tossing ideas around with some other people, we wanted to offer some design principles and some thoughts for you about extended school year. So first of all, we just wanted to remind you that you shouldn't be using ESY as a catch-all. So as soon as you put extended school year in somebody's IEP, it is really something that may be difficult to get out of their IEP in future years and those sorts of things. So you're probably not going to want to put it in there for every single student as a means of sort of catching everybody up from the COVID slide, those sorts of things, or as a means of providing extra services, as Erin talked about, possibly through the CARES Act, those sorts of things. You don't want to be doing that. And then you're going to want to think about the 4 priorities that we talked about before. So as you're thinking about the health, life, and safety of the students and staff in your buildings, are you going to want to do it in person if you can, or are you going to want to do it virtually? So in Illinois, where I'm at, we're still at high risk. And so in my area, we have chosen, all of the school districts in my special education cooperative have decided that we are going to be doing it virtually. And so that is a decision that everybody made, even though it is less than ideal. We certainly understand that it's less than ideal. And so, but the health, life, and safety being the #1 priority for all of us, as we put that out there from the very start, that we wanted to make sure that we capitalized on that. You're going to need to think through, are you going to do this at the beginning of the summer or at the end of the summer? You know, there is nothing stopping you from doing it at the end of the summer when things may have cleared a little bit more. You may have staff who are a little bit more available and well rested, parents and families who are a little bit more well rested and may want to engage then at that time with some virtual learning. You may also be able to provide some different resources that were not available at the beginning of summer. We know that, like, for example, in our school district, we're planning for a couple of different scenarios for the fall. And so as we think about those different scenarios about what the fall is going to look like, we know that an end of the summer sort of program could actually look a little bit better and a little bit different. And so you're going to want to think through the beginning of the summer versus the end of the summer. you definitely want to provide FAPE based on individual needs and student circumstances. So one of the things that really concerns me is, we talked about this earlier on in the webinar. I have heard some people talking about, maybe we just won't offer ESY this year. And that to me, folks out in webinar land, I've got to tell you, that just makes my heart stop, because that is setting us all up for really, really big claims in the future. You're not providing FAPE. If a student has ESY on their IEP and you're not providing ESY services at all, even in the midst of a pandemic, then that's setting you up for a FAPE claim. So provide FAPE based on the individual needs and the student circumstances in the best way you know how. I would understand then if you would probably take the individualized remote learning plans, maybe tailor them a little bit more, and think through all of that with your classes and your teachers for the summer in your extended school year program, but really focus on providing FAPE and making good faith efforts there. And then this last thing here, classes versus group. So you may have fewer parents and families who want to engage with you over the summer related to ESY services. So you need to think through, is it worth it? In our typical ESY program, we would put everybody into classes. Is it really worth it to go through that sort of planning? Or should we just assign a group of students to an individual teacher and have that teacher engage with those students individually throughout the summer, and maybe have them do some group work, but not, whole class times at different times throughout the summer. So think through that. What does that look like? Does it depend on numbers? Do you have the staff to do that? What are all of those considerations that you need to think through in terms of those ESY logistics? You've really got to think this through as a special ed director, and there are a couple of things that that are really going to fall on your shoulders. So that's what I've got in terms of those ESY logistics. Erin, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think as a director, I am in the process of really trying to be quite creative as it relates to multiple plans. And so I am working hard not to create a scenario where I'm stuck in one avenue without the ability to change over time. We are in a time of change. Vermont is opening up a little bit, very slowly, but we have been less impacted by large numbers of COVID cases. And so for me, I'm using that to think about, it is possible that we may be able to do some summer programming in person. I don't know that yet. But as an example, when I posted for the positions to ensure that I have staff, I made sure to include the idea that this could be either virtual or in person based on where we find ourselves. I'm also thinking about, how do I make a decision about who gets in-person services if not everyone can, who's eligible for extended school year? And so thinking about, what are those tenets? How would I decide that? What information would I use? What data would I use to help inform me in deciding which students would and would not? Staying always students and family centered in those decisions and being able to be flexible in them. To the second bullet there, at the beginning of the summer, maybe different at the end of the summer. So those are all aspects that I'm thinking about in my own process that I wanted to share and hopefully are helpful. So I think we can move to the next slide, Kevin.
Yep.
So this is a topic that has been certainly a hot topic across this whole experience, which is this idea about compensatory education. And we just wanted to remind you that from a legal perspective, compensatory education is a legal remedy if the district does not provide a free, appropriate public education to a student. There are a couple of things that we'd like to mention as it relates to this. First of all, As it relates to federal law, this is the requirement, and there are circumstances where different states are doing different things related to directing their administrators regarding compensatory education. And so it's so important that you look to your state department along with anything that we're saying or you're reading at the federal level and putting it all together to make meaning for yourself in your circumstance. But from an IDEA perspective, if you have provided clarity about what FAPE is and you have provided that during the pandemic, then compensatory education would be related to an allegation that you did not provide that FAPE. That goes back to what it means to offer FAPE. We need to be consistent in our application of due process rights and parental rights related to what we offer. OSEP has been very clear that FAPE is expected during this time. They did not say that FAPE needs to look exactly as it did during school. They didn't say that the IEP has to say exactly the same and no one may amend anything. That's not what was said. What was said is that you need to offer FAPE. And FAPE is in the context of the individual circumstances of the student. And if you've analyzed that and you've thought carefully as a team with families about how you're going to offer FAPE during this time, compensatory education would be an analysis about whether or not you did that. If you are not providing anything, if you did not have quality conversations about what FAPE is under this circumstance for your individual students, and your IEP is sitting presently as it was without any addendum of a distance learning plan under the rules or without any changes to it at all related to the circumstance, that means you've obligated FAPE as it sat when you closed during this time. It's been made very clear that FAPE extends. Compensatory education is a claim that FAPE was not offered. And so FAPE will be what you've said it is and what the family has agreed to in this circumstance. And so it's just really important to remember that. So wanted to make sure to be really clear about that. And again, that is how we see it as case and how we see it under federal law and how we've talked about it with Julie Weatherly. And you need to relate all of that into whatever your state is also expecting. We do not recommend that you simply offer compensatory education as a solution to this situation. That is not what compensatory education was designed for. It's not how it's been used in the past. So we recommend that you think about all of those points, make meaning for yourself, and absolutely consult your district attorney as you think about these issues. Kevin, I'll hand it over to you to make any other comments that you'd like to, and then move into IEP progress.
Yeah. No, that's really great and very helpful. I think that one of the other questions we've been getting a lot of lately is sort of what this final benchmark is going to look like, or as you were saying to me last night, Erin, the final countdown. It was so eloquent. I wish all of you could have been on the line.
I'm not doing it on camera.
Just understanding the success of distance or remote learning. So, again, in my district, we are thinking through sort of what does this final benchmark look like as we look at goal updates. So, we need to consider those assessment possibilities. So oftentimes we've aligned our IEP goals to a progress monitoring tool that we were regularly doing and those sorts of things. Well, we may not have collected that data during the time that we've been out of school. So you need to think through what we have done during the time that we've been out of school and been remote learning that you actually could use to assess that student. So if it's reading, is it possible for your teachers to get sort of an updated reading level in any way, shape, or form, informally or formally? Is it possible for you to do sort of a running record or a Fountas and Pinnell benchmark, those sorts of things, through virtual means or over the phone or something along those lines? Are any of those sorts of things possible? So work through those assessment possibilities now, and really look at what aligns to the goals and how you can gather that data. Then you've got to manage that data. So you've got to think through, you usually probably print many of these goal updates. They usually, I know in my district, they get sent home with report cards. What does that really look like? We still need to provide those goal updates. They still need to go somewhere. They still need to get all to the certain place in your district where they're going to go. And so you need to think through how you're going to manage that data, manage all that paperwork, manage all of that remotely. Again, my district and in my state right now, we still have a stay-at-home order until May 31st. So we're not able to even, sort of go outside of our, go to the district, except for some of the other minor things until after that date at this point. So so you need to think about what really looks like in your district. And you need to support your special educators related to analyzing that data, to provide, to help them to see what the COVID impact is going to be. Because let me just walk you through for just a quick second, because Erin was talking about the compensatory for just a slide ago. In the fall, what's going to happen is that I would say that when a parent requests compensatory education, or they say that their student was underserved, you are going to be likely to say to them, I would encourage you to say to them, let's talk about that and let's have an IEP team meeting. And you're going to come together in your short time frame and have a meeting. And you are going to need to gather all of the data that you've gathered over this really short time frame. And all of this data is going to need to be managed and well put together and well thought out, that you are going to need to be able to very quickly pull together and show and demonstrate to the family just how well you served their child. And we know that everybody's working extraordinarily hard, but when we hear stories from across the country and lots of people, and even in my own district, of people sort of saying, oh, I'm documenting that over here and I plan to transfer it over to that form that we created a little bit later on, it makes me really concerned, because I know in my heart that that is never going to happen. And we need to make sure that everything gets to one place, everything stays in one place, we all keep it together and help educators to analyze that data and keep it all together there. So Erin, why don't we move on to this next slide here, which is just our 4 priorities and a reiteration. I know that we're running a little bit short on time, and we want to be sure to get to some questions. Just a reminder here about those 4 priorities for special education, and we'll bring Phyllis and the rest of the crew back on. But focus on the safety, health, and welfare of students, staff, students and staff members in your community. Provide FAPE, deliver services to as many students as you reasonably can in the best way you know how. Document your efforts, make sure documentation is focused, consistent, detailed, and demonstrates a good faith effort to provide good services. And I would also add to that right now, just make sure that you know where all that documentation is and where you're keeping it and that it's organized. And then the last one is compliance during the pandemic. IDEA was certainly not built for this. So with that, I will turn it back over to Phyllis, who will help to facilitate the questions.
All right, thanks, Kevin. We do have a couple really good questions. One, it continues to be evident that compensatory education is an issue for many. So this question asks, and I'll toss it to Julie, is compensatory education a federal requirement required in the actual law, the IDEA, or the regulations?
Well, that's a really good question. I actually had a little bit of an argument about that this week with an advocate who was insisting that the law defined it the way that she was using it, that IDEA had a definition in there and it was the way she was using it. And I said, I'm sorry, compensatory education is not defined in the IDEA. It's not a term in IDEA. It was a court created remedy for a violation of free appropriate public education. And I think the confusion and why it keeps coming up was started with, I think it was the initial guidance letter from the U.S. Department of Education, where they used the term compensatory services, which generally strikes the heart of all educators because it's a very popular remedy that's been sought in lawsuits. And so everybody starts getting on that compensatory language train and start arguing that every child with a disability, because they did not get services during this period that were exactly like they should have in their IEPs, that when they return, they're all entitled to comp ed. And there is actually a lawsuit that was filed a couple of weeks ago in the state of Hawaii that assumes essentially that all children in the state of Hawaii were denied FAPE and are entitled to compensatory services. And I completely disagree with that. Again, I think you all did a great job describing what it is and what it isn't, but the bottom line is we have to stay the course that we engaged in good faith, reasonable efforts to provide FAPE over the summer. And so we're not talking about comp ed. Now, maybe that some services, summertime services to prevent, as Kevin called it, the COVID slide, whatever, you know, schools can start thinking about whether they want to do that, but that's not the same thing as compensatory education services. I also heard yesterday, just since we're on this topic, a question was presented to me several times this morning already. Someone had provided some information about asking families right now, just sending out a letter to them to ask them if they want comp ed for their children. And I don't think that's a very wise thing to do, because that's an IEP team decision in terms of what the student needs when the student returns to school in the fall and what that COVID impact actually was.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Really appreciate that clarification. Myrna, this next question is for you. Do they have any idea when we could expect the recommendations to be approved from Congress?
Actually, the answer is, as we often say in the legal world, I don't know. That's unclear. Actually, we don't know when the next package will be. As I said, they're working right now on another package that we think may surface in the middle of May. The problem is that we don't know what's going to be in that package. It could have no education funding at all. It could have nothing to do with flexibility under any of the laws. So it's all really up to the advocates, and CASE is working really hard. I've already got several appointments next week with members of the staff of the education committees in Congress to talk more in depth about our recommendations, which actually heartens me because they actually reached out to me after the Secretary's report, and they saw our response and press release that CASE sent out. And that heartens me to think that maybe there is actually some serious discussion going on. But unfortunately, I can't give you any indication of what the timing will look like. The one other thing I will add is the difficulty in Congress meeting right now. You probably have heard in the national news that the Senate is expected to come back tomorrow, on Monday. I forget what day it is too. It's Friday, isn't it? On Monday. And the House was also slated to come back on Monday, but now based on the recommendations, I mean, that's 435 people in the House of Representatives, and you can imagine distancing and all the staff that entails and whatever. And there have been a number of cases of the virus already on Capitol Hill, both in staff and personal offices and among the Capitol Police who service the whole of Congress. So we're very up in the air about even when there will be the next vote in Congress. So I'm sorry to say I can't give you any more specific information right now.
All right. Thank you, Myrna. We've had a couple of questions about statewide assessments. We are running low on time, but I just want to say to those people, statewide assessments, the guidance has come out from the ESSA, or regarding the ESSA, you need to look to your state departments for those answers. Those decisions have been handed down to state departments of education. So I would encourage you, if you have questions about your statewide assessments, that you go there for your answers. There has been a couple questions about what do I do in my district? How do I respond if a parent says, why aren't you opening your doors when the governor or the health officials or someone else is saying it's okay to open? I think you have to look to your district superintendent for that response as to how you should respond on behalf of your school district. So I'm sorry that we can't speak for you in your district or your state. That's why we continue to say, look at the guidance that's being offered. It has to be applicable. The question has to be applicable to where the answer comes from. So please continue to look at our website as we continue to provide guidance and answer as many questions as we possibly can. I also want to direct your attention to our next webinar, which will be May the 12th, and it will be Planning for Success Post-COVID-19. The registration is posted on the front page of the website at this point in time. We'll be sending out some e-blasts for registration as well. We are so excited. We have some great ideas, things you need to be thinking about as we will move into, at some point in time, reopening our school doors. Thank you for joining us today for our 7th webinar on COVID-19. We thank you all for supporting CASE. Stay tuned for some upcoming activities, again, by checking in on our website. Thank you again.